We all know that the legal cannabis market is rapidly evolving. More adults have access to legal cannabis than ever before. And alongside the rapidly evolving environment, knowledge about cannabis use and products and legal users appear limited. There's a real need to better understand what information is currently being used by people who are using cannabis and whether there is interest in learning more. That's why the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board and the Washington State Department of Health collaborated together on a survey. The goal of the survey was to inform future efforts to, at the end of the day, increase the health and safety of adults who use cannabis. We recruited from cannabis retail stores in Washington. We sent a flyer out to cannabis license holders at Washington State. The survey was anonymous and voluntary. And the survey battery included information about their demographics, cannabis use characteristics, how they make decisions about cannabis use products to purchase, whether they're interested in information, ways to receive that information, and we also ended with a knowledge quiz that I'll touch on in a second. There were 439 adults who participated in the survey who said they were legally able to purchase cannabis in Washington. The mean age was 42, but you can see that there was a range from older individuals to younger individuals. About half were women, and majority were white. This by no means is a representative survey, but this does reflect similarly to the census demographic data that we currently have in Washington. You can see here that our sample were pretty frequent users. 50% said that they used multiple times a day. And the average length of use was 22 years. So these were very frequent long-term cannabis users. I mentioned that we recruited participants in retail stores. And so we also asked whether they were a cannabis retail employee. And they had a large sample that were 38% said they did work with a cannabis retail store. We also had them do a knowledge check, which were 7 multiple choice questions on basic cannabis knowledge. Some were more general, others were more specific to Washington. I'm not going to go through them all given our time, but here's an example question. What is the best way to determine the strength of the cannabis product you purchase? With response options of THC concentration, sativa versus indica, strain name, and price. In this year, 64% of respondents answered correctly. In terms of content knowledge, scores on average were pretty low. Employees did rate higher or did score higher on this knowledge check than consumers, but they also scored less than 60% on average. We found that people who had used cannabis for a longer period of time generally scored higher on content knowledge. Okay, so we had 3 research questions. 1, what information is important when making a purchase? 2, what information would be interesting to learn more about? And 3, where is the best way to get that information? We use linear and logistic regressions to examine differences in the demographics that I just outlined. So age, gender, cannabis use frequency, years of use, knowledge level from that knowledge quiz I've recently described, and then whether or not they were a retail employee. Let's jump into the first research question. What information is important when making a purchase? We had participants rate on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being not at all, 10 being extremely, on different factors that they felt were important for them to know when they purchase cannabis. So you can see the factors to the left: company name, strain or cultivar name, production method, flavor, appearance, THC, CBD, terpene profile, perceived positive effects and negative effects, and price, cost. On average, most of these factors scored between 6 and 8 out of 10 importance, and I think this reflects that people are currently using a variety of information to make decisions about the products that they're purchasing. So now I am going to go through the different demographics on how they rated how important it is to know the factors when making a cannabis purchase. Women rated production method, CBD terpene profile, and received positive and negative effects as more important to know relative to men. Older individuals said that it was more important for them to know the company and brand name and the perceived positive effects relative to younger folks, but they weren't as concerned about the price relative to younger people. Those who used more frequently said it was more important for them to know the strain and cultivar name, the production method, and the cost relative to those who used less frequently. People who used for a longer period of time said that cost was more important to them, but they were less cared about the perceived positive effects relative to those who used for a less period of time. Similarly, those with higher knowledge levels on that knowledge score were less interested in positive effects, but rated knowing the company and brand name as most important. And then perhaps one of my most favorite findings from this is that we found that employees said that knowing the THC concentration was less important when making a cannabis purchase than cannabis consumers. And I think this is really interesting given that we know that consumers do rate THC concentration highly when purchasing decisions. So what information is important when making a purchase? Really briefly, people consider several factors to be important. And depending on demographics, content knowledge, whether or not you're an employee, that may weight factors differently. Let's jump to the second research question. What information would be interesting to learn more about? We asked generally, how interested are you in receiving education at retail stores? And we found that half of the participants said that they were either interested or extremely interested. And I want to call that a huge win. It's so much easier when people say, hey, I'm interested in receiving material for you to help them create more informed decisions. Similar to the last research question, we gave them a list of factors and said, what information would you be interested in? Again, the factors are on the left. Learning about how to read labels or what labels mean, health effects, cannabis laws, tips for safer use, risks for pets and youth, rates of accidental ingestion, overdoses, car crashes related to cannabis, and coordination and reaction times related to cannabis use. I'll now go through the demographics again. We found that women said that they were less interested in learning about what the label means and risk for pets relative to men, or conversely, men were more interested in learning about what the label means. Those who were older said they were interested in learning about what the label means, cannabis laws, and car crashes related to cannabis. Those who are frequently used said they were interested in tips for safer use, risk for pets, and coordination and reaction times relative to those who used less frequently. Those who used for a longer period of time said that they were interested in health effects, and this was the same for those who had higher scores on that knowledge check. And then related to employees said they were interested in learning more about how to read the labels and cannabis laws relative to cannabis consumers. So what information would be interesting to learn more about? Well, people are interested in learning about information, and certain information may grab different subgroups' attentions. All right, and then finally, where is the best way to get that information? This is a much straightforward answer here. By and far, we found that product packaging and bud tenders were the best ways people rated to receive information. There were no subgroup differences found, and this is true in sensitivity analyses. We excluded the cannabis retail employees and just looked at cannabis consumers, and they also, by and far, said product packaging and bud tenders. Before I jump into takeaways, we'll do briefly with limitations. Generalizability is limited. This was a cross-sectional study, so having a broader, more diverse, more representative sample across time in different places will help generalize these findings more. Would really be curious how these findings would differ if we didn't have so many retail employees. But we did do a sensitivity analysis, and all of the findings remained the same with that smaller sample. I'd be curious about examining these findings in medical users and people with cannabis use disorder. Those are particularly higher risk groups where getting information to them is really important. So I think that's would be an important future direction to go in. I have 4 key takeaways here. 1, knowledge levels are a growth edge, and I can say that's surprising given previous research, so that really corroborates that knowledge levels are limited in cannabis users currently. 2, people use various factors to influence decision making, and I think we can learn something from how different people weight things more or less. One interesting finding here is that retail employees in the current sample said that they place less emphasis on THC. We know that higher THC poses higher risk, and if retail employees are able to help consumers de-emphasize and take the focus elsewhere from THC, that theoretically could have public safety and health implications. 3, people want to learn more, and I love this. I think this is really important to emphasize here. One example is that more frequent users in this sample said they wanted tips for safer use. We know that people who use more frequently are at higher risk, and if they're saying, hey, I'm interested in information to help reduce my risk for harm, let's capitalize on that. 4, there were 2 identified avenues for information. The first one was bud tenders. Bud tenders are a main point of contact. Person-to-person interaction, you can personalize your answers. Unfortunately, we don't have training. We don't really know, we don't have any standardized way of knowing to what extent and how they're replying to questions that we know that consumers are asking them. On the flip side, cannabis packaging, we can really standardize that. We can make that reliable and consistent. And there is limited retail space, although there is some retail space. So figuring out how we can really utilize these 2 identified avenues in the future are really important. Okay. So thank you so much to everyone who helped and were instrumental in this whole project, including Kristen Haley, who will be our discussant coming up here today. Before I give her the floor, though, I do want to make a quick plug for the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board's research program. We are a new program that was developed less than a year ago, almost a year ago, to help provide research and inform policy decisions to promote public health and safety regarding the substances we regulate. So cannabis, alcohol, and tobacco and vapor products. Check us out online, and we have limited resources right now, but we are building out. So come back in 6 months. One thing we currently do have that's related to what I presented on today is the takeaways for retail employees that we send out to all retail employees in Washington State. Just super simple takeaways that are applicable to them to help provide kind of applicable information from the work that we're already doing. We're also interested in collaborating and elevating research that is relevant to us and will help policymakers make informed decisions. So feel free to contact me as well. Love to talk to you. All right. Good.